Right, hello people. So I'm just going to do a quick talk today about tools and resources I use for hacking. Now Matthew did mention last week about some of the tools he uses, some of the resources he uses. I thought I'd give my input on it. There will be a bit of crossover, there'll be a few things that are new. I just thought I'd have a pre-recorded video here just for my take on it. Right, so you can see here I've got Parrot OS. You can tell it's Parrot OS based on the fact it uses KDE, the tools here, and if I went into the About. Now, I've talked about before, Parrot has a bunch of tools, it has some work lists already pre-installed, and the kernel's built for security. The difference to Kali is you can actually use it as a home OS, even though I do have it in a virtual machine, as you can probably see up here. I switch my infrastructure up pretty regularly, so I currently run everything under a VM except for my host OS, which I use Windows for, purely because of the gaming aspect. So I'll also say that this is not an extensive list. I could be doing this all day essentially, and also no doubt afterwards I'm going to be thinking of more tools I probably could have given you. And also something to note is this isn't just strictly hacking tools. This is productivity. This is just getting stuff done quicker in a nicer way. You know, a lot of it's just managing what you're doing efficiently. So we're just gonna have a look at a few things. So first of all, we're gonna have a look at something called GitHub, specifically GitHub Desktop. GitHub Desktop. So you may or may not know GitHub already. If you've done programming before, you may do. Git is a versioning tool and a repository tool. It basically allows you to host a Git server. A Git server manages the versions of your code so that you don't have to have multiple folders of the code, which is a bit messy, and I've done that for previous assignments. I'm doing this for my dissertation actually, using Git. And GitHub Desktop is a nice way if you don't want to use a command line, which is a bit fiddly if you're having to, do it many times. It can be quite nice to use this. So what happens is that you edit your code, you point this to the folder you're actually managing, and it'll track updates in live time, and then you're able to push that to your local server. Now, if you do want to push it to GitHub, you can. If you don't, you still got a version control system. So you can see here, your repository. Your repository is just your online folder for your code, or even just the local server scoped version of the code. And you can push and pull. You can fork from other people's. You can merge. These are Git terms that you can look up in your own time, but it's just a really good way of not losing your assignments when they're due in the next week. So I just thought I'd mention it. Right. You can get this on Windows. You can also get it on Linux, which is good. It's not exactly native, but you can get it on Linux if you go through a few hoops. So yeah. Right. Next up, Terminator. So normally, if you were to use a terminal, if you wanted to do multiple things at once, you'd have to go into, say, a new window, and you'd have to do that. Now, while that can be dragged about, it's not always the nicest thing to use. So my preference is Terminator. So let's say I needed to do something, right? What if I needed to do two things simultaneously? Well, it's as simple as that, right? You can split it up multiple times. And again, we have talked about this before, but the more exposure we give you to it, the more you'll recognize it in future. So I could even separate it further. So it's just a really, really nice way of keeping your workspaces tidy. It's a little bit like when you move your windows about, just in a command line sense. That's not too overly complicated. You can get that from the apt repository, so it would just be a case of get install. Oops. Apt is the version of apt is where you get the actual progress bar. apt-get is where you don't. Apt install Terminator, like that. Yep. Now, if you're using Windows, I don't think you'll have that. There may be some kinds of ways of doing that that I'm not aware of, but I use Linux for this sort of thing primarily. It's why I have a virtual machine for it. Speaking of virtual machines, you'll notice that this isn't just Pirate OS, it's in a virtual machine. I used to run Pirate OS natively, although I did stop because I ran into issues of tool updates messing up my home OS. So now I just run Pirate OS in a box essentially. And why I like that is I can then take versions of that box, put them into a file, and then if things go south, because I like to test things, I like to experiment, I can just reload that back on. I do the same with my home OS, which I use MX Linux, Debian based. Just because again, on my home OS, I'm experimenting a bunch. For my Windows, I essentially just have it for games. I have it for native tools that, maybe watching a bit of YouTube or something. Don't do too much on the Windows side of things, and that could even be phased out if I wanted. But the game side of things is important, I'm sure, to a lot of you guys as well. Because while Proton is there, it's a bit of a faff. And when you want to play a game, you do want to go through all those hoops. It's definitely a thing and it's growing, but it's just not for me yet. I used to run things in a KVM virtual machine and just passing my graphics card through, but even that does have like random crashes at times. But it was good for what it was. It's come a long way. So you won't be able to see this. Well, you can see this up here, but if I was to go into settings, for example, I'm in my settings right now and you can't see it because of how OBS actually records, but you'd be able to control network, so you could have a little mini network. That's what I'm doing for my dissertation. So I've got a box for my malware analysis. It's not hooked up to any kind of network. I've got a simulated internet, and malware can talk to what I'm trying to infect, but not infect anything else. I can do that because of custom networks. It's really good because you can actually allocate resources based off what things need. No point giving a headless server 16 gigabytes of RAM, for example, unless you're crazy or you need to do some computation that is beyond just an Ubuntu install, for example. Virtual machines are just great for boxing things up, containing things, and maintaining snapshots, essentially. Something that I found earlier is actually auto protect on VMware Workstation. You can actually get cheap keys online for this. Snapshots are great, but you have to do them manually. Auto protect does it for you in a trying to think of the word. I can't think of the word exactly. It's where it takes a monthly snapshot, it takes a weekly and a daily. It'll keep a version of each. So that's insanely good for managing content. That is not an excuse to not back up your files, though, is the important thing. That's just so you don't have to reset up infrastructure. You should still have a solution to back up your files, whether that be a NAS that's then backing up to some form of secure cloud solution that's encrypted. You don't want it unencrypted, really. Yeah. Alright, next up we have Cherry Tree. So back to the hacking. We have Cherry Tree. Cherry Tree is an amazing tool for reporting. Now, you don't exactly write your reports in this, but you'd put your screenshots, you'd put your notes in here. So for example, if I went to hack the box, this is when I was trying out the tool, the box that Ryan solved, and I ran through it myself. So I have Academy open, and I whacked everything in there. And some of the other ones, so you have a node, it'll be a hacked box for example, I have a subnode for active, I then have a subnode for the box itself, I then have a subnode for the actual part of the hacking, and then I put screenshots, notes in, and it means I can go back to it and actually see what I did. I used to use Evernote for this, but this has better control for this very specific purpose. I like Evernote for just making actual notes, lecture notes. For actual pen testing related things, I like Cherry Tree. And this is great because it just all exports to a single file, so it's really good to back up things. And yeah, I really like Cherry Tree. Yeah, good stuff. Now, I did just talk about Evernote, so it's probably worth looking at. So Evernote is free. It's the single thing that made the most difference to my uni degree in terms of where I was at and where I am now. Now that I'm, some messiah like. I'll be honest. First year I didn't make too many notes. I kind of just stored it all in my head, but that isn't sustainable. Even in a job, you're going to be googling things. Newsflash. So it does pay dividends to make some form of note. Now, what some people do is they write it down, and that's great if that works for you. But can you go through notes easily like that? Can you access them from anywhere in the world? Are they secure? Do they look nice? It might just be scribbly. I like Evernote because it provides a really nice way freely to put your lecture recordings on if you've got any, to whack any lecture slides, your notes around them, and then you can put them in notebooks. You can categorize those notebooks. You can put them in tags, like network technology, for example, or Android, and you can search by those tags. And the really cool thing about Evernote is, if you've used a word even once in a note, it'll search through all of your notes, and it'll actually look for that word. And it's really useful to, if you've referenced something once and you can't exactly remember where. Evernote is absolutely fantastic for that, and it's pretty much in everything. If you use on Linux, there are what is it called? Electron wrappers for it, which is just a little mini browser for a specific app, web app. You can get those on Linux. If you want, probably the slickest way of doing it is like foolproof. If you use something like Chrome, maybe even Firefox, you can get the web app, which is just on Chrome and Firefox you get web apps, so they will still show up in here, but they'll open up in one little window separate from the browser itself, so it might as well just be an installed app. It's just handy that way. It means you can use it on pretty much anything your heart desires, whether that be an incredibly smart toaster or whether it be your computer. Awesome. I think that pretty much covers that. I'm not going to show you my Evernote because I'm not logged into it on here, but yeah, you get the idea. And then we have VS Code, or in this case, the Accordion. So this is the Microsoft IDE, but it's the free version of it, the open source version of it. You can see something I'm doing right now, which is just going through all the tools of Parrot and just making the notes about them. Let's just X that off for now. VS Code is awesome because it's the IDE that lets you install extra languages and extra extensions. So if I was to search C, for example, you'd get all of these things here. It ranges from debuggers to linters to IntelliSenses, which is what suggests you potential code. Pretty damn awesome. It has code highlighting. Let's say I'm just doing bash. Down here you can select the language. These are all the languages which are native. You select one of them. And it'll highlight to the point where you'll actually be able to see if you missed like a semicolon, for example, or if something is commented. It actually has GitHub natively in the store. GitHub right here, so you can do the GitHub desktop things that I was talking about before just in here if you log into it, if you prefer that. You've also got LaTeX if you're fond of your professional writing, which is what I'm having to do for my dissertation. Awesome tool. I used to use Sublime. A lot of people use Notepad++. I really like the debugger for this, to actually step through programs and see what they're doing. And you can actually see what you've got open here and pin certain things, which is insanely useful. The thing that I actually like about this most, you get a bloody terminal. I think even if you're on Windows, this is a bit available for Windows as well, you still have either a PowerShell or a command line terminal, and you can use it you can decide the shell that you've got here. So even if you're on Windows, if you've got some access to Bash, you can plug it into here and install Bash. So then I can still do, you know, what I would normally do here on here. So if I needed to compile something that I didn't want to just compile with a native IDE builder tool, I could just do it here. If I wanted to run a specific command to check where I'm at, I could do it here. It makes it a lot easier to manage something we're actually programming. Awesome. Alright, for the last bit of this category, actually I'll talk about this thing later because it's hacking specific, or at least security specific. Right, awesome, so I'm just going to go through a few web applications at the moment. Now this is where you'll inevitably see some crossover, so that's fine. VulnHub. Remember when I was talking about VMware before? VMware lets you box everything up in a virtual machines, let them talk to each other. VulnHub is amazing. VulnHub lets you download pre-made virtual machines that let you hack them freely, totally free. You download them, you have to work out what IP address they're on usually. Or I might even give you it. I like the ones where they don't, just so you have to train yourself to, you know, sniff on the network for ARP or whatever. It's really interesting. If we were to go into here, you'd get an OVA file. An OVA file is just like a box, sorry, like a zip of them all the files you would ever need to import into either VirtualBox, if that's what you prefer, or into VMware. And then you get these downloads here. Interestingly, you get torrent files. Now, we always think of torrents as being the big bad things of piracy. The technology itself is totally fine, right? It's the implementation of it sometimes. You know, it's a bit like a knife. You know, a knife can be used for good or it can be used for bad. Not that piracy is something that's overly chased up in the first place, but you get my point. Torrents are used here because people can seed them and you can sometimes get even faster downloads, whereas some, you know, Google might limit you, wherever else might limit you. You don't so much have that elsewhere. It'll give you a description of what the virtual machine's about, roughly, and where you might want to look in terms of hacking it. The benefit of this is totally free, so you don't actually have to worry about, you know, paying for a subscription to get access to infrastructure if you're able to host it yourself. And you don't have to worry about anybody else being on the session, you know, potentially destroying your progress, which is a problem with HackerBox. So you would just download the OVA, you would import it into your virtual machine. It would then create a folder, which a virtual machine would be there. It would be essentially like you've built it yourself. You've run it, you put it on bridged. The bridge is important because then it gets its own IP address. One thing to note though, don't put this on overly vulnerable or open networks, just because the fact that they're vulnerable means they can be hijacked, they can be leveraged to gain access to other things. So just be careful that you're doing it on your own network. Yeah, that's your warning. But an insanely good tool, and it's something I need to use a lot more, to be perfectly honest, when I've got more free time. Then the next one. Now this one's fairly optional, I would say, but it's made the most difference to my learning outside of university. This is like the practical side of things. In university you learn the theory side of things, the approach, which is, you know, my strongest suit. Pentester Academy is absolutely amazing. It does cost a lot of money, granted. What I'd recommend doing is if you're serious about this, try it out for a month when it's on sale, mind. When it's on sale you can get it for like 30 quid a month, which is fine if you're just doing it for a single month. Go through its labs. The labs are absolutely amazing. You don't need, you know, your Pirate OS or anything like that. Now it's good to get experience in that, but you know, you want a bit of it off your back so you can just focus on the skills themselves rather than having to spend hours setting up infrastructure to actually do this, for example. This is where I'll learn cron exploitation. It's where I'll learn, you know, sudo user ID exploitation, command line, network, sniffing, Active Directory hacking. It's all on here. Fantastic stuff. You got actual videos on here. I didn't use them overly. I used the attack defense actual labs. You can see here the actual courses. There's something here for pretty much everybody. The Wi-Fi hacking is very good. It's just something that there, if you're serious, and there's a lot more user friendly to start off with than Hack the Box. The Hack the Box almost expects you to already know the stuff, whereas Pentest Academy kind of gives you hints, and they have write-ups of the solutions that you can look at afterwards. If you want that with Hack the Box, you have to wait till the box is retired, and a video's made essentially, because even if it's retired and you haven't paid for premium, you can't see the solution unless you look elsewhere. Because Hack the Box is much more focused on competition, whereas this is more focused on learning. Yeah, I don't subscribe to this currently just because I got what I needed out of it for the time, but I will come back to it when it's on sale. Because I realise it's quite expensive, but it is insanely good for what you get. Right, what's next? Okay. Now, I do appreciate this is a longer video. It's just good to talk about why I like it. Another widely known one, but I just thought I'd mention it quickly. Over the Wire. So these are vulnerable challenges that you have to conduct. It really increases your Linux skills. You just SSH in with the password from the previous one, and then you solve the challenge by Googling, essentially learning skills, and it'll give you some form of hint usually. The first one is Bandit. I'd recommend everybody does at least Bandit. Amazing resource. You can see some of here, some of the sort of stuff. It's essentially what I was teaching you before on Linux, but on kind of roids. Makes you have to use it in a practical way to actually solve it. Really good, and it always adds new levels. Yeah, for example, that doesn't even exist yet because they're still working on it. And then if you've got past that one, there are plenty more. Something I'll talk about as well is that you'll not strictly get through all of these, because you can't get through all of everything in security. You can't just pick and choose and get general awareness at a uni level anyway. Sorry if I sound kind of stuffy and stuff. I'm not overly well at the moment, but I wanted to get this video out for you guys. Next is Immersive Labs. So Immersive Labs is something I used the other summer. Immersive Labs are like Hack the Box in a way. They're like Pentester Academy. They're kind of like a merger between them. They give you online virtual machines that you can log into that already have everything installed that you need to actually hack. An insanely good tool, and something you don't actually have to pay for if you're a student, which I assume if you're watching this, you are students. You can sign up for the educational edition. Plenty of stuff on there, much more I can actually talk about. Anything from sysadmin sort of things to hacking. Yeah, it's kind of hard to talk about abstractly without actually logging in, but something for you to discover on your own time. Highly recommend at least looking at it. And then we have, of course, Hack the Box. Now, Hack the Box is absolutely amazing for red teaming and pen testing. It is the creme de la creme of the actual skills you want to put in. Very deep, very difficult, to be honest. Even the easy machines aren't easy for a beginner. So it's where you want to kind of aspire to if you're wanting to do CTF stuff anyway. It's not for everybody. I'm much more of an awareness, much more of a theory, the architectural side of things, system administration. But even if you're like me, you need an awareness of this sort of thing. So Hack the Box is so extreme that you need to be able to hack into it to even get access to it. Now, Matthew would have again talked about this. I'm not going to talk about it too much more. Hack the Box is great. There is premium. You don't necessarily need it if you don't want to go too deep. Premium is absolutely awesome because you can spawn previous machines, and it's great for seeing write-ups. You can also get much more private sessions, just in case people are brute forcing things and absolutely killing the servers, because you are on a VPN with other people, and that does pose its own risks, so just keep that in mind. You can manage those risks by having it in a virtual machine, not having a crazy vulnerable machine as your VPN host. But yeah, now something I'll mention, because Cosmin always talks about this, is Crackme's. Crackme's is great if you're doing reverse engineering. To be honest, it's something I need to use more. You'll get like a binary file, you have to analyze it and get the flag essentially. You do that by reverse engineering. You'd use like tools like Ghidra, IDA, strings, just to go through the actual binary, pick things apart and reverse the logic. This is even a bit beyond me, but it's something to start looking at. I would recommend if it's interesting to you. Cosmin's the person to talk to with this sort of thing. This is his speciality. To be honest, I'm trying to get into reverse engineering with my malware stuff, because that's part of my dissertation. It's just one of those very steep things to get up. If you ask Cosmin, I'm sure he'll be able to direct you a bit more on this one, but I thought I'd mention it. Awesome, so that's all I'm talking about in terms of platforms. Now we're talking about kind of tools beyond the actual, productivity side of things. One that I've just seen recently, GPA, really, really cool. So GPA uses the private, the asymmetric key model. The asymmetric key model basically says you need a private key. Each host has a private key. That private key contents can only be decrypted by the other person's public key, and there's a relationship between private and public that's very cryptographically secure. There's a relation that can't be mathematically destroyed. So what you normally do is use those keys to validate a host and a server. Sorry, a client and a server. The client would have the public key, which the private key then calculates something of, and then they have a session, right? If another public key tried to decrypt that, it would just be garbage. So that's your fundamental idea of encryption, right? Normally you would add that to, say, SSH or another service. You'd have to use like SSH keygen. This is a really cool thing because you can actually create your keys in here, and it's really, really nice to actually manage them. You can add like notes to them. Let's give it a go. New key. Test. And now I'm just messing with the system here. That's not. You would want to do this, PS. Store it securely. And then you'd want to passphrase. I'm just going to put garbage in here, but again, you'd want something meaningful in here. It's very weak. He even tells you if a passcode is really weak, which I really like. So I'm gonna, destroy the rules of security and just do it anyway. But you would, do this a lot more securely than I'm doing. It's just for demonstration. So then you could export the keys. Let's say key. And let's put it in my folder. There we go. And now if I was to go under here, keys. There we go. We've got a cryptographic key what we can use for SSH, and we can keep it in here, and we can set, user control and the like. I found it while I was investigating a bunch of pirate tools, and I think that's something I'm going to use in the future. Right, very good. Now it's an online. I'm going to do an online resource. This is something was talked about last week again. Thought I'd mention it quickly. CyberChef just handles all kinds of encoding, and it lets you kind of play around with things relating to encoding. So you could encode things a bunch of times and see what comes out. You could decode, say, a payload that's been hexadecimally encoded and then base 64'd. So for example, if I was to put that in there, you then get this. If I was to then take this and get, put that, I would then get that. You can get much more involved things than that. For example, you could use magic. Now Magic's cool because it'll actually give you solutions based off the input. And you can make it much more invasive. So this will give me a bunch of garbage as well. This is really, really good if you've got like complex encoding where it's maybe done it multiple times in different ways. And then you can increase the depth and it'll take insanely long for some strings. Really, really good. Something I've done recently with this was I took some malware, I got its payload. Malware loves to compress its payload to get past detection systems. Might use base64, might use hex. Essentially what you have there is assembly instructions, which are then run later on. And that's a form of obfuscation and exfiltration. You could then decode some of that in here. Like I've got hex before from a payload, whacked it in here, and I've just got a bunch of assembly instructions, which is really interesting to then go through. So this does have real world, impacts, not just your CTFs. What's next? Okay. This is something again Ryan talked about last week. Good resource to know about. So GTFO bins, when you're in a system, you'll want a privilege escalator. Sometimes you don't have access to, overt privilege escalation methods. So you would perhaps look for living off the land, which is what this is called. Living off the land is meaning using tools that are kind of native to, say, an OS and exploiting them based off the permissions they're set up with. So these are very specific queries that you can exploit if configuration is not done right. But you can check with a few commands, for example sudo-l, which Ryan showed us. You want to check last week's recording. It gives you a string that you would want to ultimately understand before you use it. Don't be a skitty. And you would then, try it out and then see if it works. And then you'll get higher access, usually a shell, maybe even a reverse shell to something else, where you can then, use the leverage to root, which is the overall goal, usually in a CTF. And then just a quick one, a non-surf. Non-surf is a Tor wrapper for your whole system. So you might have heard of the Tor browser. It's how you access the darknet. It's also how you anonymize your traffic. So this is very popular for criminals, but it's not just criminals. The police service uses it. Activists use it. Journalists use it in other countries. Helps against censorship, like North Korea and other countries like that. So let's say you're doing something very clever, you'd probably want to do it on Tor, right? To avoid your IP being traced. It's a bit more of an extreme version of just using a VPN, because Tor is relayed a bunch over the world multiple times in a very secure way, but it's a bit out of the scope of this talk. But absolutely great tool, and you can just start it and stop it from here. You might have to install something extra to do this, but it'll let you know. Really, really good. It's just built into Parrot and I'd assume Kali as well. And then we have Pen Test Monkey. Now, this is one of the nuances with safe security and dangerous security. So bad guys and good guys essentially use the same tools to test security. So some browsers will flag, what we use as dangerous. This site, as far as I know, is perfectly fine. Obviously go at your own risk, but they kind of, block it on the premise that bad guys use it. So what you have here is cheat sheets. So the one that we mainly want to look at is your reverse shell cheat sheet, which gives you perfect strings that you can whack into scripts, that you can whack into commands just to leverage a shell, because you don't want to reinvent the wheel. If you understand the premise behind a reverse shell, it is perfectly fine to use these. You just got to make sure you don't fall into the category of being a script kiddie, because that's not going to be great for your career prospects. Yeah. this site also has other good stuff, as you saw before. You know, you have your hash formats, because hashes ultimately are from different encryption methods, and you will want to use different codes, for example, in Hashcat, or John in this case. And then you have MySQL. I'm sure XSS is here somewhere on another page. That leads me quite nicely onto XSS payloads. Now, Matthew did a XSS, actually Ryan and Matthew did an XSS talk the other week where Ryan did magic on a website and he got weird things to happen with the browser. So XSS, again, is just exploitation of JavaScript locally to have an effect on the back-end structure, essentially. So it could be, you know, adding a credit card skimmer to a comment section, or to a sign-out page, checkout page, which it reads your credit card information before it sends it to a legitimate server, if it's being hijacked, for example. And they would do that ultimately by having some form of payload. Now, as good as Riot is, he was essentially showing remote code execution, right? If he was doing that in practice, you would need something to actually execute, right? You can't just have the RCE. So you would use some form of payload. Payloads are here, they're elsewhere as well, but payloads are categorized, capture, system, browsing, and more. Let's look at capture. You have all this stuff. Keylogs are very common, as are screenshotting, as is skimming, as is data exfiltration. So you would want to understand these before you use them, obviously, because just as easily as something could, you know, be used against your adversary, they could also be used against you. So you've got to be very careful about what code you use. It's like downloading a tool where you have no idea if it's trusted or not. You're just doing it because, oh my god, free game on the darknet. I'm just going to download it because I want Rainbow Siege for free, even though it's an online game. Try not to do that. Anyway, I digress. Very, very good stuff. Good site for getting your payloads. Sorry about my speech. Very, very tired and very, very ill, but again, I want to get this out. Next up, not sure if I can actually show you this easily. Something called Cyware Social. Okay, I can show you it. So Cyware is a security aggregation platform. Cyware Social is amazing because it allocates its app to, you know, aggregate all the news from cybersecurity from reputable sources, which is the key. You can filter out the kind of security you want. Perhaps you want just ransomware attacks. Perhaps you want legislation changes, emerging threats, that sort of thing. Really, really, really good tool. It's how I actually get my security news, because the problem is I don't use Twitter. I'm not particularly fond of Twitter, but I still need my security news, right? I'm not particularly fond of LinkedIn for getting my security news either, because you can get biased thoughts and stuff. So I like an app like this, which aggregates the security together in a nice way. It's nicely formatted, gives you nice notifications. It's something nice to talk about in the meetings, to be perfectly honest. Keeps you up to date, because security is something you never want to be back on your back foot with. And yeah, let's have a look at a few screenshots just to get you an idea. Awesome, and you get nice notifications, like I said. Right. Next is IEEE Explore. So when you get to my point, even second year, you'll start to look at IEEE papers. Even if you're on a computer science course, if you're looking at IEEE papers, because you need to get your information from sources that isn't necessarily just web pages all the time. Sometimes you can't help it, but for example, if I needed information about denial of service, if I can spell ICMP, if I search for this, it'll give me a bunch of papers. you can see here. Now, these papers have usually good research in, experimentation, but also information about when it was done, the circumstances it was done. So it can be really useful to actually see a person's mindset in terms of this and actually learn something. You can then reference these papers in your own work, and it just helps you learn something. It isn't just hacking tutorial number 55. Quite good for the actual theory of it, and very, very good for technicals as well. One thing I do want to mention is you are assumingly students, so you have access to this. Normally you would click on this and you need some form of access. You would plug in Northumbria, you'd log into Northumbria, then you get a PDF. One of the absolutely fantastic things you can do is cite, and it'll cite it for you. So you could take this, whack it into your assignment, and then reference it as you would do normally. You could back that in. I wouldn't recommend doing that for all your lecturer's sanity. You can also have BibTeX. BibTeX is just a language to describe how your writing might look. Something that if you're in cybersecurity and computer networks, Neil might talk about, or whoever's taken that module for advanced security project, something like that. You can plug this in, and you can essentially have references very easily. LaTeX is not something we'll be talking about right now, but I thought I'd mention it. Now, I'm going to tell you about the absolutely ultimate security tool for actually learning. Amazing, right? Literally, a lot of your problems can be solved by Google. Google's, as you know, is like a fantastic resource for actually learning, whether it's finding Stack Overflow pages, documentation on a specific tool, other people's opinions. I just thought I'd put this in here because people sometimes forget a lot of people's knowledge is knowing how to Google, and that isn't understated. That's not taking away from yourself. That is being accurate to what you're doing. You can reduce your reliance on Google if you make notes like I did, like I suggested with Evernote, but you are ultimately going to have to Google things. We don't just read books anymore. It's the 21st century. Books are in conjunction with Google these days. And so in my opinion, to Google is to question, and to question is to not be a script kiddie. So if you're able to ask security questions, you are leaps and bounds ahead of a bunch of other people who just want to run a DDoS program to kick somebody off an Xbox, for example. So there's that. So now we're in the last section where I'm just going to go on Reddit and talk about a few subreddits that I like, because Reddit is great for people's opinions. It has a hierarchical, democratic in a way, system for working out what's right and wrong. That is a bit swayed sometimes. I'm not going to go into the logistics of that, but it's great for actually getting opinions on certain topics. So I'm just going to run through a few of them. Cybersecurity, obvious, hot security news if you don't want to say use Cyber Social. Something to talk about. Sometimes you get a culture of superiority with security, so be wary of where you go and who you ask certain things, because people will always think they're better than you. Just a side comment. Then assist admin, which is just business networking infrastructure. Really good if you got a specific question, but it isn't going to break any NDAs, of course. About certain software, strategy, that sort of thing. Computer science, goes without saying, security is a branch of computer science ultimately, so you need to have an idea of what's going on. Helps to get an idea of computers as a whole, which is why you have computer fundamentals in the first year. Darknet Diaries, I drone on about this every day essentially. I can't spell. So Darknet Diaries is a very successful podcast about hacking. And there's a subreddit behind it, and it can be good to get people's opinions of episodes, because the episodes are very what's the word? very honed in on specific topics, and there's a lot to absorb, so it's good to actually have discussion around it. So yeah, bit of a small subreddit, but it's a very niche community. You can do this for any kind of podcast to use. Cybersecurity fails. So we have to remember that security can go wrong. And so this is a really kind of a humorous place to see where it has gone wrong. For example here, 1234 hashtag, because this stuff does happen. It's why you would potentially have a job. So it's kind of good to have culture around that. Let's have a look. What's next? Home Lab. Now, usually this is full of people just bragging about how much money they have, but occasionally you get some information about actually how to, implement something. Cool software to put on your server equipment, and it can be quite a nice community outside of hypebeasting for actually, figuring out how to actually home lab. Home labbing is one of those things that is very desirable to employers because they can see you're doing stuff just outside of your job, and you generally have a passion for it because this is a lot of work, and you're not going to do it without passion. Home labbing could be quite easy. You can just do it from, a small little Intel NUC, something like that. Even just virtual machines, to be perfectly honest. So yeah, what's next? I've got a text document next to me. So Hack the Box, of course, has one. Usually it's discussing boxes, tools, write-ups, and the like. I don't need to say much more about that. Hacking tutorials is the next one. So you'll see that a lot of these places have like educational disclaimers. Even we have to do them because unfortunately there are people who go to these places and just want to hack somebody's Facebook account, for example. So they kind of do have to say that to save their asses. There it is. So this is just people's experiences, people's requests for help. A lot of these subreddits are similar, but they've got their own little nuances, and you'll find related communities down here. How to hack, essentially the same thing. There you go, essentially the same thing. Now, I know you're all meme beasts out there, so it's IT memes is the next one. I cannot spell today, I swear to God. Okay, IT memes. There we go. So, I understand that, we can't just have security and all this stuff seriously all the time. We need to have a little bit of fun with it. Which is also why, of course we need Linux memes as well. Understandable. Oh my God. Here we go. Yeah. Everything I would expect. Anything else that's notable? Lockpicking is something you don't always think about. Cool little subreddit, gives you little tips how to lockpick. They've got a little culture around having different belts. So if you can provide a video of you hacking a certain lock that's of varying difficulty, you will get a yellow belt or an orange belt or whatever. Quite cool. Nice little place to showcase what you've done. Just to get ideas of the physical side of security as well, because it's not all just hacking databases. Now there are other subreddits, but they kind of follow these same structures as the ones I've talked about. So I think I'm going to leave it here, to be honest. Bit of a longer video. I understand I'm a bit nasally today. But I just thought I'd spend a little bit of time just to show you a few resources. Not extensive by any means. A few resources to get your foot in the door. Perhaps you've learned at least one thing today. It might have been cherry tree, something that surprises people usually. Just to make things a little bit easier for you, because if everybody had to program a tool every time they needed something, then nobody'd ever have any time. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed listening. I hope it's helped you. Thanks very much.